that actually the way to achieve prosperity is to have those key things that make a prosperous state. The rights of property, the rule of law, freedom of speech, and democracy. All of these are essential components of success. If you take a single one of them away, you find that the others are not protected. So free speech protects democracy. Democracy protects the rights of property. The rights of property are part of the rule of law. The four always come together.
Some socialists seem to believe that people should be numbers in a state computer. We believe they should be individuals. We're all unequal. No one, thank heavens, is quite like anyone else, however much the socialists may pretend otherwise. And we believe that everyone has the right to be unequal. But to us, every human being is equally important. A man's right to work as he will, to spend what he earns, to own property, to have the state as servant and not as master, they are the essence of a free economy, and on that freedom all our other freedoms depend.
So you want to tackle climate change, but you're trying to increase the population of Canada. The two don't make sense. If you wanted to reduce the main cause of climate change, according to you, you would reduce the number of human beings in Canada, not increase. Myth number one. And using the media to produce your message tells anybody all they need to know. All they need to know. A government-funded weather channel promoting climate change and what we evil human beings must endure to stop it. Do you really think human beings can stop your climate change? Do you really think we're that powerful?
Let me sort of describe my overall policy. I mean, what I've said is that we would put a cap and trade system in place that is as aggressive, if not more aggressive, than anybody else's out there. I was the first to call for 100% auction on the cap and trade system, which means that every unit of carbon or greenhouse gases was emitted would be charged to the polluter. That will create a market in which whatever technologies are out there that are being presented, whatever power plants that are being built, that they would have to meet the rigors of that market and the ratcheted down caps that are imposed every year. So if somebody wants to build a coal-powered plant, they can. It's just that it will bankrupt them because they're going to be charged a huge sum for all that greenhouse gas that's being emitted.
But we're going to make polluters pay and put money in your pockets.
There is an imperative to put a price on pollution, and if there are costs associated with for average families, we will more than compensate those families for those costs.
Well, how are they going to do that? They talk about this rebate as if you're going to get the money back, and then you're going to get a premium, so you're going to get even more money back. How do they calculate that, though? That was a part that was lost from the conversation.
Every place where we come through, there was lots of trucks. Weyburn, there must have been 250 trucks waiting, and every town that we come in, there was more joining every time. I think everybody's sick of the government that's ruining us. Other than that, everybody's just here to try get rid of this carbon tax. Why doesn't the federal government do like our provincial government? I got 20% back on my solar system. Why doesn't the federal government also give us an incentive to put this in? Instead of giving money to other countries to stop carbon, why doesn't he give everybody in Canada a chance to do like I'm doing?
We have a lot of members that are going to be negatively impacted by a carbon tax in the province of Saskatchewan. A lot of our guys rely on fossil fuels, unfortunately, to build Saskatchewan's highways and transportation networks. So there's a lot at stake here in terms of jobs and competitive advantage or disadvantage in this case for our members. We're looking at well over $1 million in additional expenses for the industry that's unfortunately going to be, offloaded onto the taxpayers because the major procurer of our service is government, whether it's provincial, federal, or municipal. So ultimately, the taxpayers are going to be, facing a heavier burden because of this.
the carbon tax introduced in Australia was not going to do anything to world temperatures because we were not going to be the leader. We weren't even being followed. The idea that Australia would be able to convince China and the United States to change their energy systems was obvious nonsense, and it became to be understood as obvious nonsense.
We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds.
Thank you for joining us. You are listening to A Radio, and this is The Morning Moment. We're on weekdays, 11:45 Eastern. Follow us on Spreaker.com and click on the like button. I chose an extended intro to this podcast for a reason. I wanted to point out the comments and garbage that's out there about carbon tax. The garbage from the Canadian Prime Minister, the garbage from the former President of the United States, who darn near wrecked the US economy, our Prime Minister in Canada, who is wrecking our economy, and finally, right at the end, after you hear from ordinary Canadians pleading for help and being ignored because they're in the western part of Canada and they don't matter enough in the voting tally. But right at the end, you will hear someone who has experienced carbon tax firsthand. The Australians, who threw it out completely. Why is it that the Australians can throw it out, but our lot don't learn from that? That's why I played that long intro, to make you think what's going on. This has been going on for some considerable time, and it will not stop until these people are removed from office. They can't even be allowed to be a dog catcher. Any of them. They are a clear and present threat to your way of life. I'm starting off with this piece with the title. It's Beef is like a loaded gun pointed at the living world. This is from Channel 4's Twitter page, believe it or not. And it's George Monobot, Biot or whatever, and he's debating the impact of farming on what they call climate crisis with farmers and the Farmers Union Vice President Stuart Roberts and Professor Corinne Le Quéré, I don't know how you pronounce that, some French name, from the UK Committee on Climate Change. So that paints the picture of what's to come. But this piece, in my mind, highlights the danger to us all. This piece is nothing more than the mainstream media in the UK doing the job the UN wants them to do. They are giving the impression that this is normal conversation in the UK. It's not. It's activism driven by the UN and large international companies hell-bent on destroying the Western way of life. Here's that piece. Links will be on my site.
The only hope we've got of getting through this century is switching to a plant-based diet. And beef particularly, I'm not blaming Stuart for this. He's a beef farmer, he can't really help it. But beef is like a loaded gun pointed at the living world. It's an absolutely disastrous product.
I think the first, and I would agree with you on some of the report, George. The reality is, what has not been picked up enough is some of the really big issues in the report. Food waste, for example, which is one that has not had enough attention put to it. But I also think, actually, let's look at different production systems. Let's look at our production systems here in comparison to production systems elsewhere in the world. And actually, I genuinely believe my grassland, 65% of the farmland in this country that is grassland, is the second biggest carbon store in the country, and we're taking that grass and turning it into high quality protein.
What we see very clearly, and there was a paper in Nature last year, is that were that grassland currently producing beef instead be allowed to rewild and forest to return to it, we would see massive increase in carbon storage as well as massive improvements in environmental and ecological quality.
The report goes much beyond meat only. The report looks at all the pressures on land. And the big problem now is that we're looking at land as producing food only, yet land provides a lot of other services, provides clean water, timber, carbon storage. It helps us to adapt to climate change. And all these other services are not rewarded at the moment. And this is a big problem for farmers who get mostly their reward from producing food.
Now, let's be clear. Let's be very clear here. In Canada right now, food quality has dropped dramatically. Meat products in the majority of Canadian supermarkets has reached dizzying heights as far as prices are concerned. It's become out of reach of many customers. Meat has in fact become in Canada a luxury item. It started with pork, moved on to chicken, and now they've reached their main target, the beef industry in Canada. I predict right now that if Trudeau gets back in, it won't take very long for the federal Liberal Communists to ban all imports of beef, thus cutting off the only remaining supply to Canadian consumers of meat products. That's affordable meat products. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Agenda 2030 in action. And if they manage to oust President Trump from office in the next presidential election, they will implement the same taxes on Americans that Canadians are suffering now, all with the goal of finally finishing off all farming in the United States. I kid you not. This is Agenda 2030. Take a look at it, see the goals, and you'll have no doubt. Make no mistake, these people are patient. Up to a point, that is. They can wait, even if President Trump is re-elected. You have to plan now for what comes after him, because if you don't, and you allow these crazy Agenda 2030 nutballs into office, they will implement Agenda 2030 and climate change and carbon tax, and then you're done. And next, they will come after your guns. Oh yes, they will come after your guns, and then there's no going back. As I've said before, Canada is actually fighting for its very existence as we know it now. For Canadians and for Canada, there is no next time. If Trudeau wins this October 2019, the drawbridge, I believe, will be finally raised. Now, I know there are people out there, even those who are avid followers of Hutch, who probably believe that I've gone too far. Well, all I can say to that is, I hope they're right. I want to be wrong. I want to be so wrong. But many of us here in Canada don't think we are. Now, in closing, and this is purely off the cuff, there is a document which I'm going to put links to from the British government which shows an image of greenhouse gas emissions done in a sort of graphic diagram, shall I say. And these are the numbers. 27% of greenhouse gases in the UK, this is the latest one that they have released, 2017, is caused by transport. 17% of greenhouse emissions is caused by business. 15% by residential. 24% by energy supply. 4% waste management. 2% other. And 10% agriculture. Now, how they know these figures, to be honest with you, God only knows. God only knows how they got these figures. But they want to change your way of life because someone has decided that beef is evil and we should all be eating plants. And I've got another story coming up which is linked to this, which you will not believe. You just will not believe that one. It's even more outlandish than this one. But I want you to be under no illusion at all. This is only the beginning. This is only the beginning. They intend to fundamentally upend your way of life. No longer will you have the right to move from A to B. This is their ultimate goal. They want to keep you in a little box in a high-rise. This is all the beginning of implementing Agenda 2030. I can't emphasize this enough. This is real. This is actually happening in the UK right now. And when you hear the next piece, you will be utterly stunned. But there again, I don't think you really will. I want to say this in closing. The mainstream media is utterly and completely complicit with this. They refuse totally to allow alternate views on anything to do with carbon dioxide tax, climate change, global warming, whatever you want to call it. Global gas emissions is another title they come up with. They refuse to have an alternate view. In a democratic society, I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, there is always an alternate view. So why don't we hear it? What gives them the right to tell you this is your view and this is the only choice you have? Just in closing, briefly, please go to your weather maps today and look up the temperatures in the far north of Canada and above, and you will see that it's heading towards freezing right now, and we're still in August. In another week, it'll be below freezing. So for these people to lie openly to you that glaciers are melting is disgusting, disgraceful, and the lowest form of journalism in my mind. In another 2 weeks, it'll be snowing like crazy in the Arctic, and we would only just got to September. On the east coast of Canada, there are still icebergs in the water in May and early June. And in 2 months after that, the snow comes back. It's been like that for 50 years or more. But they don't want you to know that. They'd rather destroy our way of life in Canada and your way of life in the US and certainly your way of life in Europe and the UK. They have a goal. It's to redistribute the world population and to deculture the Western world. That's a new phrase I've come up with, by the way. Deculture. They're doing it openly in America by destroying the history of the United States. That's the first step. Destroy the basis of what the country is built on. It's racist, it's homophobic, it's slavery, everything else, and then rebuild it in their image. What will we be left with? I'm grateful in a way that I'm old enough that I hope I won't see it, but your children will, and your children's children really will. We have to stop these people. We have to. They're not democratic. They do not believe in your best interests. They believe in world domination. This is what this is. It's world domination. Be under no illusion. These are the same people that have been supporting the massive expansion that has allowed China to get to where it is today, to be a world threat for peace and stability. Those are the same people. They're the same people who support Iran and having nuclear weapons. We don't need these people in charge. Give me 20 Donald Trumps any day, than one Trudeau, than one Theresa May, than one Angela Merkel, and that crazy nutball in France, Macron, a real cookie cutter. Please look at these documents. Please, please, please look at Agenda 2030. And you tell me if I'm wrong. And stay tuned for the next instalment. You can find more at aradio.wordpress.com, where you can find links to us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Gab, and email. We are also on Spotify. Just go to the podcast section and type Canadian Politics with a twist, and you'll find us. We are continuing to reach out to you, so please pass on the links. Please click on the follow button on Spreaker.com. You can listen to all our morning moments at Spreaker.com under A Radio. That's EHRADIO, A Radio. And please click on the like button. And you can now hear a weekend review of our podcasts on WHBJ DB, News Talk Radio. Join us and many others, and you can find all our podcasts and morning moments at aradio.wordpress.com. Click on the Morning Moments tab.